Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And up next, we bring together the best readings and advice on running a successful marathon. And after that, the world of running updates on American records, 20K champs, and more. Don't forget to get your questions in for this month's Q&A episode. We'll be answering your questions at the end of the month, and so you need to submit them now to make sure that you get in on the next round of responses. That happens via atozrunning.com/question, and you can share anything on your mind having to do with your training and racing and running and otherwise running-related things, and we will respond to them to the best of our knowledge and abilities.
Mm-hmm. We love connecting with you, and we do have a couple YouTube listeners. Shout out to our YouTube listeners.
You're not supposed to say embarrassing things on air.
I love, all the different forms of how we consume content, but YouTube is out there for those of you who like the YouTube method of listening.
I have heard of it.
Shout out to Pete, who comments frequently on our podcast on YouTube. And on the episode with Rob Andro about returning to running, he wrote, "Such a good and timely episode to remind me to ease back into running from this foot issue and the gift of having other interests besides running." Which he has a really cool interest that I love to see online, and that is he uses a telescope to
space photography.
That's
super cool.
Space photography. It's exceptional and it's awe-inspiring. So that's a very cool interest. And it's possible that some of you guys think that we're like really big or something, and we
Where
actually
are you going with this, Andy? Where are you going with this?
Well, we don't get tons and tons of comments and things, so we do actually get a chance to interact with your comments and look at them, and we do love to hear from you. And sometimes we get really excited because we'll get emails that will tell us that there's like a comment on our website, but they're almost 100% spam ones that are like telling us that all kinds of mumbo jumbo, but then they like have a link to like a weight loss medicine, which we don't allow on our
We should start
site.
reading spam
so
comments
I think
on
we
air.
should start
Some
reading
of them are
spam
really
comments because
funny.
we're getting so much of them.
They're
so
also
many
just
of them, I should
really,
say.
really funny.
They are pretty funny.
Robot-written
but we'd rather,
spam comments.
way rather than be real comments. So oftentimes we get excited and it's like not a real comment. So we would love to hear from you. All that to say, we'd love to have a real comment. So thank you, Pete, for commenting on that episode, and also for how you use your interest to even better the rest of our lives by seeing all that space photography. So that's really cool.
As it happens, if you like what you hear when we're talking, and who wouldn't, there are 3 things that you could do. And this is how this kind of game works, right? We're trying to grow our influence and audience and such, and largely because we think that some of the things we say now and again are helpful to some people once in a while. And
I hope so.
So
That's the goal.
Right. But there are 3 things, and this is if you're not familiar with these kinds of things, and you listen to any podcast and you hear people say these things because it's true, to have digital influence, you need kind of a couple of different things. One is, like, if you like it, tell other people who like this kind of stuff about it, who aren't aware of it, and maybe they'll listen to it too. Don't stick your neck out on the line, though,
No.
because we don't want you to lose credibility with your friends just because Zach says semi-offensive or otherwise
You don't say offensive
incorrect
stuff.
things now and again.
No, he doesn't. You guys. Okay.
But the key, the digital interaction, there are certain specific types of interactions that seem to matter most. And the first is when wherever you're listening to something, you like review it and rate it and give it like the decent rating kind of thing. And specifically when you write a review, it tells those systems that this is something that people care more about. And so it will elevate it in its like algorithms. And then on the other side, in YouTube especially, the various types of interactions. There's like many interaction types in YouTube, but those kinds of things seem to matter a lot to YouTube because, of course, they want you on their site, and so they want you interacting with the content. So commenting, liking, subscribing, the bell icon, all that kind of stuff.
It's helpful.
Well,
and we thank you. We thank you for those of you who do connect with us. We really appreciate it. I did want to give a promo for this week. It's the final call for the LMCU Bridge Run in Grand Rapids. So you want to sign up. Well, not
Best
final
10-mile
call, I guess.
Race.
It's just, you're getting down to the wire here.
Yeah. They've got a 5K, they've got a 10 mile, and that 10 mile is like the best 10-mile race pretty much ever. in my
We love it. We think it's
opinion.
pretty great. And Zach will be there. Zach will be running it.
I will.
Yeah.
Andy won't be there.
I won't be there. Sad, sad. It is Sunday, September 18th. And so you'll want to look out for that and probably register sooner than later because it's just around the corner.
That sounds good.
Let's get on to our main topic.
So for the topic this week, we've been talking a lot about trying to put together, like talking between the two of us and with others as well, but trying to put together our reflections on training and racing specifically for the marathon and trying to really just like package it better. We talk about these kinds of things ad hoc throughout all of the things we discuss at some point or another, right? This is how these things go.
Almost every podcast we're talking about training.
They come up in conversation constantly.
It relates.
But have we, and I don't believe we have really clearly put together like what it means to successfully run a marathon or execute a successful marathon race. And so what we want to try to do here is lay out for you in as direct terms as possible the things involved in a successful marathon race and our current understandings of how these things interact with each other so that you can have the best possible marathon. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Well, as it happens, the first thing you always have to do when you want to be successful at something is define what that would look like if you were successful.
Mm-hmm. It's going to vary from person to person. Success will be defined by you because guess what? This is your journey. No one else's. You get to decide what success looks like for you.
Yeah, so there's a reason why in like the business and education spheres, why this is such an important thing. They're always discussing things like standards and what does it mean to like achieve something and what does that look like clearly. And the reason for that is because it proves to be quite difficult, in fact, to consistently achieve success at something if you don't have a clear definition in your mind of what that success will be. Case in point, so many runners finish a race that otherwise is a great race and that they feel semi-disappointed because going into the race, they didn't have one clear definition in their mind of what would be success if they accomplished it. So then when they finish, they're always thinking, well, I could have done better. I could have done more. Or what if this or what if that? And so part of us, we're always doing that to a degree of like, you know, what's the next thing? I think that's by the very nature of pursuing a goal. That's kind of the way you think. However, we have to have clear sense of success in any endeavor. And especially when we're talking about something like the marathon, which is a beast of its own. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure every time we go out and do that, we have clarity on success. Now, we have two layers to this. The first layer is the universal definition of success for a runner, and we are going to give it to you, which means you must.
It's not the universal.
It is ubiquitous.
The performance-based version.
It's the only definition that everyone will share. You must. If you're listening to this now, then you know what is true, and the truth is this. Okay, so why am I saying it that way? Because in fact, anytime we race, the race performance thing has everything to do with whether we gave as much as we were able to give to achieve what we could have achieved on the day. And so then all other goals and all other specific objectives aside, there's really only one true measurement of did I, as a runner, exhaust myself to the degree desired? And we would say it like this. We have to exhaust everything available by the time we cross the finish line. Specifically, it would be best to exhaust everything available at the moment you cross the finish line, not a moment too soon, because then you're having some pretty miserable moments for a little bit there. But that's not, of course, very straightforward. It's just the spirit of the thing. When we're running, we're trying to give our literal best effort, and that has everything to do with how much of what's available we expend before we're done.
Okay, so I agree with you for your goal marathon that this could be the case. However, our life is a journey, right? We have a lot of races that we do that we're discovering other things. For instance,
I'm not saying everyone should be trying to exhaust themselves every single time they race. I'm just saying that's the clearest definition of what it means to fully expend what's available. Okay.
Performance-based success. So, for instance, my first marathon was not to find my limitations. I was not to find my absolute maximum potential.
Andy was trying to find out how long she could run a marathon while smiling and looking like she was prancing. her first time.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment. Should I be saying thank you?
She
or
smiled
was that,
and looked kind of like she was...
backhanded? I'm not really sure. But my goal for that race, my very first marathon, was to run the distance and to have that be my triumph. So when Zach's talking about this as a performance-based goal, if you are seeking to PR and find your maximum potential in the marathon distance. Now, there's going to be other races, maybe before you go for that, you haven't even run a marathon before. So maybe for your first marathon, you're going to have a different goal. Maybe you're not going to get quite to your maximum potential because you haven't had enough practice to know what that would look like yet. So all that to say, I'm hedging Zach's, what do you call that, absolutism,
But
in this being the goal that people have for a marathon.
But watch me make my definition still fit your caveat, which is this, because what your capacity or your potential on the day, if your goal is to maximize everything available potential, so that's what we're describing here. But if your goal is to feel a certain way at the end of the race, like I don't want to just be totally dead and expended everything. I want to, feel pretty good and such. Then you're still doing the same thing. You're trying to expend as much of the available energy within a certain limit. So you're just applying a different limit on it. One might be absolute everything. One might be I want to feel good still. I'm not trying to exhaust everything that's available, but the concept still applies, which is you're trying to give a degree of effort over the course of a period of time, or distance, in this case is more distance, and get to the finish line with a certain sense of feeling, whether it's like, I want to feel good, I want to have fun, I want to enjoy the experience, all of those things are part of it as well, potentially.
All right. Well,
Yes.
I think there's quite a few scenarios, but I would love what Arthur Lydiard said in Running with Lydiard. In a marathon, you are racing to your own capacity first. And who you be along the way depends very largely on how successfully you do that.
And whether you PR depends on
Exactly.
how successfully you do that.
And it didn't say in a marathon you're racing to your own pace first. No, that's not what it said. It said to your own capacity, which can vary depending on the day. It can vary depending on many, many factors. So in this, it says to your capacity. So being able to find what that is within the race, to be an intuitive runner, to be able to pull yourself back when you're giving too much.
You're jumping the gun here, Andy.
I'm jumping the gun. I'm sorry. But it's all related. It's all connected.
So the principle then is clear sense of what a successful race is going to be. And so you may not be telling us right now, you might not be saying, well, I don't want to try to do as much as my body can handle on that day. I want to enjoy the experience. I want to have fun doing it. I want to apply a number of other caveats. Maybe you're running with a friend and you want to be able to support the friend the entire time, all that kind of stuff. Our goal here, as we're going to unpack then how to accomplish this definition of success, is assuming that you're trying to get out of yourself a high degree of potential. That may not be like to the extreme, like I was articulating, but that's okay, because the point first is you have to be able to get across the finish line in some semblance of orderliness. It can't be totally falling apart. In
What
most
he's saying
instances.
is going 26.2 miles is a long way to go.
That's not what I'm saying, but that is true as well.
But you're saying being able to go across the finish line. I think first and foremost, we have to respect the distance and the magnitude of that achievement in and of itself. So everyone needs to be able to train in such a way to be able to do something that the very first person, which is a legend, very, very first person wasn't able to. That was 26.2 miles was when they passed. So I'm trying to say that in a
theory.
That's what I just said. I said it's a legend.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is it's a substantial distance. So being able to go the distance, even just doing that, if you're not trying to push yourself, if you're wanting to do it with a friend, or Zach saying like in any situation, having to go that distance requires some level of awareness toward these other factors that we're about to discuss.
So here's how we want to do it. First, what are the things involved, and then kind of how to put those pieces together. So as you approach your race day, you have conditions and weather on the day, which is a factor in the
Huge.
equation. How you feel that day matters. And so we're not talking about like your fitness and your training preparation and such, but just when you wake up that day or when you're starting to run in the marathon, how you feel in that moment is itself a unique factor. Hydration, fueling, you're certainly aware of those things. Apparel and shoes and accessories. So the stuff you're wearing and or carrying and or not carrying but having on your head. And then the people, if you have support or not, or what that might look like. So all of those things are going to play together to try to have a successful marathon experience. And what specifically we need to do with them is the key here. And this is what we're going to try to describe here for you to have the right day. So first and foremost, the how you feel piece defines how you start the race, not how you end the race. And that's important because you can feel bad in the beginning of a marathon and still have a great run.
Yeah.
Lots of people, in fact, have had that happen.
Lots of times.
And that's not to suggest then that you just power through hoping that the end will still be fine. You have to respond to how you're feeling. But the point is that you can recover a better race than how you feel in the beginning as long as you respond well to it. And so rarely is it, of course, then beneficial to push through feeling badly with the hope that maybe you'll come out the other side. That tends to backfire most of the time for most runners. So instead, the mentality isn't I have to push through this. The mentality is I have to respond to how I'm feeling now, knowing that I can feel better later.
Right. But I guess I should clarify too, if you are going into your first marathon, you might start feeling uncomfortable and you have a long way to go. Well, guess what? You're really good at being uncomfortable. So Zach is talking about dialing things back and having the ability to understand oneself enough to know that you need to dial it back in order to have a successful race. Well, there may be a point in your race where you just have to keep your pressure within this uncomfortable realm that is achievable for you. So
I'm talking about starting easy.
Yeah.
We'll get to what you need to do later in the race here soon. So then the next couple of factors that are going to combine importantly are hydration and fueling. And you have to always remember that the best thing to do with a marathon race for hydration fueling is to plan it out and execute the plan, even if you don't feel like you need it.
Yes.
And so this is the key here where you have to have a clear sense of like the physiology of, so what is it that your body needs? How much of it does your body need? How much of it can your body do something with? This is very different for every person, by the way, and has a lot to do with the conditions as well, which we'll get into a little bit in a moment. But then, so keep in mind that when you're not feeling like you need something, you still should be taking things on your schedule, even if it's early in the race. And it's like, if you start feeling like you need something, it probably means it's too late to do something about it.
No, it's never.
Probably.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be. But don't get that in your head. That's a very negative thing to have in your head.
You do need to have that in your head because if you're waiting until you feel thirsty to take a drink, that's too late.
Don't wait.
Don't do that. Frequency is more important than exactness. And so taking, whether it's the right amount, doesn't really matter as much as just making sure you're getting something fairly often. The biggest problem with hydration for runners is that runners are taking too much all at once, too rarely. And one, you're not processing it as effectively. And two, you feel badly when you have it in your body. And then you feel badly when you're needing it more a little bit later. And so as a consequence, you're just feeling worse on the whole by taking too much all at once rather than just spreading it out more. Now, I also know that this has a lot to do with what aid stations are available and how they structure those. So that will be a piece in the puzzle as well. And then variety also with fueling is more important than the perfect or the right fuel. And the reason we say that is because the body has so many different ways of absorbing different kinds of things, and certain things can absorb in greater and lesser frequency than other things. And so the variety is helpful because you can tend to absorb ultimately a greater aggregate amount of something if there's multiple different kinds of things, different ingredients, different sources of sugars. There's like 4 or 5 different normal, like common sugar sources. And so all that kind of stuff matters. Mm-hmm. Then the other thing to remember here in general is it is better to just go with what your body knows and is familiar with rather than like something new and unfamiliar, because it can backfire.
That's horribly. Like a really big deal to have practiced your nutrition and to know how it sets.
And then conditions on the day should determine your degree of effort at the start. And so the key here is, how do we respond to the day's conditions in a way that helps us be the most effective possible? So when it's cold, the interesting thing about that is that it takes longer for our body to heat up. And so it is actually better to make sure you're a little bit more warmed up beforehand, and like wear extra layers as you're getting ready and such. Like be warm beforehand, because if your body starts warmer, it's going to stay warmer better. If your body starts cold, it's harder to warm up and takes a little bit longer. And so that's not ideal. So you want to keep in mind then, in the cold, don't overdress, but certainly wear like maybe layers or something tends to be a good idea. In the heat, then you have to remember that the heat rarely ever feels all that badly at the start, but almost always feels exponentially worse as things get later on. Yep. And so in the heat, start easier than you think you need to, and expect that you have to give less effort than you feel like you can. And then the next one is when it is wet. That's the other most significant conditions related thing. And so two things to remember about wet. First is that you are heavier, and so you're going to expend more energy, especially later in the race as you acquire more water and you get soggier. And so it is necessary to assume that you're going to be expending more effort than you normally would, simply because of the nature of the increased water weight that you're carrying around in your clothes and shoes. And so in that sense, it tends to be better to just start a little bit easier. It also tends to be better to
wear less.
Well, I was about to say the opposite, though. Err on the side of being warm rather than being dry, or like,
it just depends on what the conditions
are.
are.
So if it's warm and rainy, then it's not a problem. But if it's cold rain, you're going to expend more energy. Your body's going to expend more energy trying to warm itself up in that cold rain than it will carrying around some extra water weight on your clothes. So wear layers that can help you keep you a little bit warmer, even if it means that they're going to be soggier or a little bit heavier.
I had a couple ideas for some different clothing things that can help you out. And they are ice and ice vests, cold packs before you race in a hot race. And those are really helpful. Bring them to the start line before you, if you're able to, have someone, a loved one, bring a cooler, get rags, put it on your neck. That's a place that you are able to bring heat from your body a little easier. Your wrists, your feet, you probably have shoes on your feet, but those are great places to put cold packs or ice. And then also hats or headbands while you're racing, if they're lightweight. Then when you're dumping the water on your head, it will keep more of that water on your head to help you with the evaporation, with the heat from your body. So those are some ideas. And then also the opposite. So if it's like really cold, like Zach said, some throwaway layers. You don't want to not be able to shed the layer if it's an in-between type temperature like 30s or 40s. You want to be able to take it off if you want to, because you're going to heat up through the race.
Don't wear your race bib on your outermost layer.
Exactly. So if you have if you're wearing a long sleeve, don't have that be your outermost. Have your bib on that outermost. Gloves, for instance, like even those dollar store ones, if you know you're going to throw them, if it's like high 30s, 40s, and you know you're going to throw those gloves, you might as well just buy the really cheap ones. It's not a big deal, unless it's raining. Then maybe not, because they're cotton. And
One thing to remember, though, about tossing gloves in the cold is that you tend to need them the most in the final stages of the race, because as your body is struggling to try to like maintain energy levels and get blood where it needs to be in the muscles, it doesn't really want to be running blood to your hands when your legs are doing all that work. And so for most, they tend to feel like your hands start to get colder later in the race. Usually in the middle of the race is the worst, when you're like your hands are hot but you're carrying gloves or you're wearing gloves still. So it's kind of like, maybe carry them instead of throwing them, or if you got a belt on.
Yeah, it depends on the distance of the race, but we're talking about the marathon specifically here.
We are, in fact.
So you're right. Yeah, you should be maybe hanging on to those. But I have shed many a glove, and I don't like to shed expensive ones. But for the marathon, it would be worth it to have some good ones, I think.
All right, so now let's talk about what this looks like to execute the best possible marathon race, start to finish, and even a little before the start as well. So we've discussed kind of what some of those factors are and how we're going to respond to them, but then what does the actual race execution look like? So first of all, wake up early enough that you can eat something and drink a fair amount. I've heard many marathoners express something like, I don't want to drink too much because then I have to pee more. And my answer to that is, it's better to be hydrated and have a little extra pee that you got to deal with than the opposite, because the worst thing, or not worst thing, the most common problem marathoners experience is that they're not hydrated well enough in the race. The source of your discomfort and issues tends to most likely be the hydration and the electrolytes that are involved with that. So it's better to hydrate before you race at risk of needing to pee a little bit more than to avoid doing it simply because you don't want that issue. In one of my marathoning friends' words, it's really not that big a deal to just pee down your leg in a race. If that's the worst thing that you have to do to spare yourself the bonk and hitting the wall late in the race, that's okay. Now, of course, some are willing to do that and others are simply not. But the point is, that's a better direction to err. And yes, you do need to eat something before the race. And it shouldn't be gels. It shouldn't be goos. You should eat something with more substance, which means you should eat an hour, 2 hours or so before the race.
For your actual food. Because
like
you can
food.
eat a gel right before you start.
No problem there.
Yeah.
Yep. And the reason for this is simply because you're trying to think about it like this. You've got stored fuel supplies, and your glycogen levels, you can store up to maybe about 2,000 calories total between your muscles in your blood and your liver, lining your liver. And so you want that to be as full as possible when you start the race, those stored glycogen levels. And so eating a little extra carb-focused food, doesn't have to be just carbs, but carb-focused, tends to make a difference. It's a small difference, but it does make a difference. So,
well, I mean, it makes a huge difference in the days leading in.
But well, yes, but I'm talking about
like
the morning
of. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. So maybe we should just mention in the days leading in too. In general, in the week of the race, you should be making sure that you're topping off your stored levels of stuff every day, not just waiting until like the night before or something like that. So the carb, fat, protein combinations you should be liberal with those things during the entire week leading up to the race. No problem if you eat a little bit more of that kind of stuff than you normally would. No problem if you break your diet rules for a little bit there, because that is going to help ensure that your stored levels of things are, in fact, as high as they can be. So that plus eat something in the morning. And one quick note about what you shouldn't eat in the morning or things to avoid.
Bacon, egg, and cheese bagel from McDonald's.
That's, in fact, been proven anecdotally to be highly effective.
Anecdotally, that's the key word there.
And by others as well. And so the things you need to avoid specifically are high fiber. Some people can get away with fiber better than others, like some people's bodies can process it better than others. But in general, fiber is a terrible fuel source for
You
running.
just don't want it to go through you.
Yes, because what fiber does is it inhibits the absorption of other nutrients in your digestive system. And again, for some, it's greater and lesser than for others. But the point is, no matter what, fiber is an inhibitor of absorption for other types of things. So less fiber, more other things is good. Also, similarly with fructose. Fructose is one of those sugar supplies that tends to go through you more than absorb, or at least it absorbs less than the others.
There's not as many of the receptors for fructose.
Yeah.
To be able to use it.
And so on the whole, if you eat a lot of fructose in your breakfast, that's likely just going through you, or at least a lot of it's going through you, and you want to avoid eating things that are going through you rapidly. So that's why you focus on like a carb-related, carb-heavy type of thing. And personally, I tend to find a great success with some protein, some fatty protein as well. And that's been proven by some of Matt Fitzgerald's work too. So it has. Matt Fitzgerald, he's authority on the subject.
I eat a bagel with peanut butter, in case you wonder what I eat.
Which is kind of
more normal.
Yeah, that's what I tend to do more than not these days. Yeah. But anyway, so that's kind of how you just make sure you're waking up in the right amount of time to have opportunity for that. Otherwise, the only reason why you need to wake up a certain amount of time before the race is because you don't want to be still groggy and sleepy when the race starts. So you want to be awake fully. Your body and your energy systems and your metabolism are all running before you start the race. And that tends to be the right amount of time to do so. So then the other layer here is before you start the race, making sure that you have enough time to get the body warmed up a bit. Some, but not too much. Most of you listening probably don't do too much. While while that is the case for some, we find as we're talking with other runners that it's actually the other side. Many don't warm up enough, or at least don't warm up in a way that's helpful. And so what we're talking about here is when you're trying to get yourself warmed up, the one thing is just getting your heart rate elevated just a little bit so your body temperature starts to rise. You don't want to be like sweating before the marathon starts. You have plenty of time in a marathon to really, truly warm up. So you don't really need to be like ready to race when the gun goes off, as it were. But you do want to have some of the planes of motion activated well. And so a little bit of activation work, which also helps get the heart rate up, as it were. So it's, accomplishing both things. And then a little bit of active mobility tends to be good so that you're comfortable in your running stride when you start. You don't want to feel like you're, bolting off the line, but you want to at least be comfortable in your running stride.
Mm-hmm. And Lydiard said that a lot of the higher level athletes that he would observe would do too much beforehand. And really, if you want to go for a PR, like the level of runners that he had, which were world caliber, he was like 15 minutes before your marathon is quite enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So to hear him say that too was kind of, or not hear him, to read that he said that too, I think is really helpful in understanding what you might need to be able to go and start off the race for a PR day.
In that sense, then, it's good to avoid being on your feet for too long, but at the same time, don't sit down for too long stretches at a time.
Just do it just right.
Well,
so like Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear.
Yeah, what it is,
right.
is if you're walking around a lot, sit for a little bit, and then get up and do a couple of just gentle activation things, and then, feel free to sit back down if you've got a while still yet. The goal here is you don't want to do like the, walk 2 miles before the race starts and then stand in a starting corral for 45 minutes. Now, what do you do about the fact that you may not have a choice and you have to get in a starting corral super early? I am so infuriated by these race directors who do this, where it's like you have to be in the starting corral an hour and a half before the race.
It makes sense logistically,
there.
Zach. It does,
no,
but it does not good for the runners. But it does, like logistically, they have to get everyone.
But they don't, because that's not on them. That's on the runner. So how about you just say, get to the start line and start as soon as you're able to once the gun goes off.
People trampled.
Yeah, but not really, because the same rule applies. You can't start sooner than the people in front of you are starting. So either way, anyway, my point is, if you can, you're waiting around that start crowd, get off to the edge and then just sit on the ground for a couple minutes, do a couple gentle activation or mobility things in the ground, like that kind of stuff.
Isn't there's a picture of Ryan Hall before the start of one of his races, sitting on the ground, isn't there?
Just sitting on the curb?
Yeah.
He wouldn't be the only one. Yeah. Make sure that you toilet early and often, because
goes without saying, I think.
What tends to be the case with that kind of stuff is it's like, do I have to? Should I? The answer
wait till I get to the start?
The answer is just yes. If you're not sure, or if you're thinking, maybe I should try again, the answer is yes. If you have the opportunity, or if there's just a little discreet curb nearby and you can crouch or something. Anyway, so other than that, if you're doing these kinds of things, then you're ready to start well. And so that brings us to the running of the race itself. Mm-hmm. This is our favorite part. Okay, so the first thing that I have to mention is your starting position in the race is mostly irrelevant. The only concern is you don't want to be in a situation where you just have to stand and walk for the first mile to get around all of the people. That's not ideal unless you're planning on walking for the first mile, and then it's great. But the point here is most of us have this thought in our heads of I need to make sure I start with this group so that I can kind of hang on to them, because that's the kind of thing I want to run, or because that's they'll help kind of keep me on pace, all that kind of stuff. And remember Andy's earlier comments. You shouldn't be caring about what your pace is or whether you're on pace, at least in the early stages of the race, because that's the surest way to guarantee you're running the wrong pace. So instead, our recommendation for runners in general always is to not be trying to contrive your starting position based off of what other people are doing. Many do, in fact, run with others. You're going to run with a pace group because your friends are, or because, all that kind of stuff.
Nice to run in a
That's
group.
great. Yeah, understandably. However, the point is you should not be trying to get yourself into a pace group that's going to somehow pull you along to a major PR or something, because that by itself is contrary to the fundamental point of how to get the best performance out of your body.
It can be helpful if that is the race you need, but you have to know if it's the race you need.
Which you can't know until you're done.
That's true.
So you have to remember.
Based on how you feel. Yeah.
So,
but the other danger, I do want to say, the other danger is starting too far up and then having the adrenaline and the race excitement make you go too fast to start. And I think you all know this. I think that's kind of a general caution for runners, is that we often will get carried away. Well, it's more likely you'll get too carried away if you start further up than you should.
Yeah, in fact, it's not even that. If you start with the people who are trying to run the same kind of performance as you're all going to start too fast, because everyone starts too fast in a marathon. So you should start with people who are trying to run quite a bit slower than you, and they'll probably start on the degree of effort that you should be giving initially. And then they'll all slow down.
For you.
They'll all slow down after a little while when they realize, whoa, I was way over my head. And then you'll be just like cruising pretty, passing people all along at that point, which is kind of the way you want to be doing it anyway, because, when we talk about like the psychology of running the race, you want to be moving up in the late stages of the race to have the best chance of both feeling good and executing good performance. So as a consequence, start in a way that will lend itself to achieving that more likely than other things. Okay, so we got that down. So that's kind of the point of, if you're a touch behind in terms of like the people you're starting around, what you believe you can perform at, you're likely to be in the best possible scenario, and you're likely to start you'll have people around you is kind of the point. Like if you're worried about, will I have people around me? Because you'll be passing them, and it's great. Okay, now as far as when the race starts, the one key reminder is don't bolt off the line and then have to like calm down, because that it's harder to reduce momentum and feel good than it is to increase momentum and feel good. And so if you start just a little bit too slow, for instance, it's easier and more productive to increase momentum as your body's warming up more than the opposite. So
very true.
Better to just start like especially easy. And a good example of that is a lot of times you see these racers coming off the line. They kind of start walking into it, and then they kind of pick up into a jog, and you can see their cadence start to quicken a little bit. Just give yourself the time to ease up into it. It's good. All right. Now, when you're in the race, we're going to break it into two halves. Actually, we're going to break it into 3 quarters, but the first 2 quarters go together. So in the race itself, you have essentially 2 phases to the run. You have the part where you're running easier than you know you could, and you have the part where you're doing as much as possible to achieve and extend yourself as best you can. So for the first half of the race, the recommendation is to be running easier than you think you are able to do. Because remember that in a marathon, the work and the pain almost never happen until the final third, final quarter of the race. And so that first half of the race, you can be running, in fact, let's give an example. Say you run 5 to 10 seconds a mile slower than you probably could in the first half of the race. You're still more likely to be able to make up that time plus some in the last 10K than if you run on pace the whole time and then get to the last 10K. And chances are you'll feel better, which will yield both just a better experience and more likely a better performance. So there's that consideration. Now, that being the case, it's the negative split versus the positive split mindset. Yes, it's true. Sometimes people get away with a positive split that achieves a great performance. It almost never is a positive experience, though. Like, it feels terrible most of the time.
What do they say? There's a saying, Zach. Positive splits for positive people.
Okay.
Have you heard that?
No, I haven't. I don't really, but I'm not a positive person, so I don't have to worry about that. And then remember, in the first half of the race, this is when you're feeling really good. You're not feeling thirsty or hungry or anything like that, but you still need to be hydrating and fueling. As a matter of fact,
gotta drive that one home.
Yes, it's more important that you're hydrating and fueling in the first half than in the second half.
Yes, because you can actually use it.
Right, because by the time you get to like mile 18 to 20, when you're feeling really bad and you're really thirsty, so you're trying to chug stuff, your body's not doing anything with that. Hardly anything with that.
You're just probably keeping yourself like afloat, but it's not
maybe. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So yes, the first half is when it's the most important to stay on your hydration and fueling schedule, and it's the time when we are the least likely to do so. So do yourself some favors. Now, when it comes to how do I make sure I have my hydration schedule on schedule, if the aid stations don't have what you need or aren't at the frequency that you need them to be, you should carry something. And as many people as will say, well, it's kind of annoying to carry something, it's heavy, like all that kind of stuff, it's still train with it beforehand so you get used to it. It is better to have that inconvenience of having to carry a 10-ounce bottle or something of that nature, carry a couple extra goos in a belt with a bottle, all that kind of stuff. Better to do that and have what you need when you need it, rather than be dependent on aid stations that in many instances is fine, but for some races they're not often enough.
You want a mix in there too.
Yeah, they're not often enough, and they're not giving you the kind of stuff that would be best.
Yeah. And I'm going to be a little sassy here, but I'm going to say it. Yeah. If you're willing to carry a big honking phone, but you're not willing to carry hydration.
Wait, are people carrying their phones?
Oh, of course.
Get rid of your phone. Waste of energy.
What I'm saying is it's better to carry your hydration than to carry your phone. So I would challenge those of you who don't want to carry hydration. But those of you who do have a phone and you use it for music, or maybe you're taking pictures because it's about the experience.
Carry a GoPro.
But if we're talking about performance, here and wanting to get the most out of your body, if you're going to choose between those two things, choose the hydration every time.
Sure. All right. Yes, good. Okay, so now you've gotten through the first half of the race feeling like you could have given more effort than that. Like you have to get through halfway basically feeling like you have just been kind of like really comfortably running casually, not necessarily like literally jogging, but
not casual.
But in contrast,
you feel great.
Yes, you need to feel great. And why is that? Because remember, in terms of all the stuff we've discussed so far, in addition to that, the energy systems themselves, the lower you are at your energy system capacity earlier on, the more you are able to exert yourself later without running into like running out of energy, running out of fuel, all that kind of stuff. And so in especially as it concerns, you want to get through this first half, but then you want to get to like maybe mile 20 or so, still feeling pretty much good. Now, at that point, right, at that point, you've been running for a long time, and so you might not feel good simply by the nature of
running.
That's a lot of running.
2 miles. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a lot of running. When you're 20 miles in, that's a lot of running. So you might not feel great anymore, but you have to feel like you have plenty of energy left. There's a difference between my legs are tired and starting to get a little bit sore and I have no energy left and I'm just running out. I'm running on fumes, like those kinds of things. So get to mile 20 feeling like you have energy to spare still. That's the goal. In terms of performance in a marathon, that's the number one goal you should have, which means when you're halfway in, if you're starting to feel like, I'm starting to feel it a bit here, then just carry on what you've been doing. Don't make any dramatic changes. Don't try to accelerate just because it's like, I need to make up some time here. It doesn't matter if you need to make up some time. If you don't have the energy left, if you try to make up some time at mile 15 and you don't have enough left at 20, it's pointless what you did at mile 15. So wait. If you're feeling really good, then you're in the right spot. And yeah, just carry on.
A side note, at mile 20, if you're feeling terrible, because it happens.
Why would anyone?
Right?
No.
You don't think anyone does?
I think everyone's feeling great at mile 20.
Everyone's feeling great. So if you don't feel great, just remember that oftentimes if you just keep on moving, you're running better than you think you are, even if you're not feeling great. Does that make sense? Because I remember in Chicago, I was not feeling great, but I was moving along a lot faster than I thought I was. So I'm really glad that I just kept moving and doing what I could do in that moment, and just, really putting some resilience in. And I just want to encourage people, if you do come across a time in your race and it's towards the end, it's in the later stages, like at mile 20, if you just keep on keeping on, the finish line will come. Sometimes it feels like it will never, ever, ever, ever come, but it does. It finally will come, and you'll be done with the race, and you'll be proud of yourself for doing it.
Yeah, well, as it goes, you want to make sure that you get through mile 20. As Barry McGee said, the race doesn't even truly begin until mile 20.
Which would be depressing for someone to hear while they're running a marathon, by the way.
Yes, but that's the, like, you get there, then for the next 10K, you have the chance to exert everything that's left. And the reason why you wait until then is because if you start draining the well sooner than that, your heart rate's going up too fast, your body temperature might be rising too fast, you're burning through too much energy. And so the way your energy systems work is that there's no like, we call it thresholds, right? Where you have like lactate threshold, aerobic and anaerobic thresholds and that kind of thing. But it's not a single line. So there's not a moment when your anaerobic energy system takes over from your aerobic. It's more of a kind of period of time. And within that, you are starting to transition between energy systems much earlier than when like you hit the kind of like, now I'm totally all into anaerobic or something. So as it goes, the same thing works with how your body's consuming fuel types as well. And so your body is consuming more and less of certain fuel types depending on the degree of effort you're giving. So you wait until this point in the race because chances are you've been able to conserve quite a bit more fuel simply by staying a little bit lower than the line of what your potential capacity is. And then you can expend at a much higher rate, and you can increase your pace even substantially, potentially, not always. But the point is, if you can't increase your pace substantially, chances are you would have been hurting a lot more if you were running harder earlier too. So we're playing the game of what ifs a lot when we talk about this. And the way this goes, essentially, is that we have to make some assumptions because every race experience is slightly different for every person, and every person handles races and marathons slightly differently. But the point is how can I ensure the best chance for getting what I can out of my body? And this is the kind of format that yields the most likely consistent positive result. There. Now, let's have a quick conversation about preparation. Because in summary, this is not an episode to talk about how to train for a marathon.
We've got a lot of episodes for that.
We've got a lot of that, and we'll talk more about that. As a matter of fact, if you have a question in the month of September and you want to submit it, AtoZrunning.com/question about your own training and or your own marathon experience, because remember, these things are very different for each individual situation. However, a quick note about training, just simply to understand preparation. You need to rehearse the key factors, like what the hydration and fueling type of stuff. You need to practice that kind of stuff ahead of time. You don't want there to be surprises for your gut on race day. But two, you have to do the right kind of work to prepare your system, your musculoskeletal system, so that it can endure. This is what Andy was saying earlier. Respect the distance, because you have to be able to handle running 26 miles comfortably before you can run a marathon and expect a positive result.
And that's going to make you all shiver just a little bit, because a lot of us in our training, we're not going to reach 26.2 miles. We're not going to do that in a single run.
No, and you shouldn't. I mean, most people shouldn't be running 26-mile training runs. But what you should be doing is the kind of stuff that builds up your musculoskeletal resilience, your structural strength, so that you can handle it when it comes time. And among many other things, there's a lot to talk about when we talk about preparing for a marathon, but that's a different conversation. And with that, let's get on to the world of running.
This week in the world of running, we get to start with a PR from one of our A to Z runners. Congratulations to Nikki.
Congrats.
Who got a PR in the half marathon at the Marquette Half Marathon. And she was also a top 10 performer, second in age group. So yay, Nikki. Way to go.
Solid effort. We were always excited by personal best performances. And certainly for every runner everywhere, it's that validation of the hard work. And it's like, yes, I got it.
So
good
fun.
work. All right, first up in the world at large, we have got to talk once again about Grant Fischer.
Yes. And I just like to say this because I feel it brings it home literally that he grew up in Michigan. So I remember hearing Grant Fischer's name when he was in high school and knowing that he was going to do great things in the sport of running. But to see him go in the record books, not once,
yet again,
not twice, not 3 times, but now 4 times.
So here's what he did. In Brussels, in the Diamond League, so there's just a couple more Diamond League meetings left in the year. We're wrapping up the track circuit now at this point, and that means that things are just getting really intense, and it's loads of fun. So Grant's been running great, and we've been talking about him plenty, so you know all of that. But this is just the year for records for him. And so if there's one thing we know about distance running, it's that it's very hard to sustain momentum over long periods of time. So I don't know what exactly he's been doing in training to accomplish this, but he's been able to hit like peak form multiple times within small windows of time, which I just find to be so impressive. So here he goes yet again in Brussels, 5,000-meter race. We watched it, and it was just so cool to see basically the attrition, the war of attrition, and you see runners just slowly fading off because they go out at like 12:40.
Yeah,
12:40 people. There's only like 2 people who have run that fast in the history of time, and so they go out at like 12:40 pace, and you know that it's just going to be how long can you hang on kind of thing, and one at a time people are fading off. But Grant is right there, and what's crazy is every time someone starts fading off, he knows it right away. He recognizes it, goes around them, reattaches to the people in front, and just keeps right there. And it gets to the point with a lap to go where it's Jacob Kropp from Kenya and Grant Fischer, and Grant's just right on him. And the only thing he didn't have to win that race is in the last 150, Kropp had just a little extra gear and put a second on him to beat him. But Grant Fischer, second place in Brussels for a time of, are you ready for this? Everyone holding your breath? Are you sitting down? 12:46.96.
Yeah.
Grant Fischer.
Yeah, Grant Fischer.
New American record. That's like 7 seconds off of Bernard Lagat's record, which itself was legendary. So that's just so cool.
Bernard Lagat held it for 11 years.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. So good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Jacob Kropp running also, what was it, the 7th fastest time ever when he won the race. Grant's time is the 12th all-time ever, which
in
is
the history of the world.
Yeah, in the history of the world. Oh, man. Okay, so Brussels was exciting. There's a lot of other fun races, but that was the icing on the cake.
Yeah, and we also had this week the USATF 20K Road Racing Championships. And to briefly give you the lowdown there, we had Keira D'Amato.
Keira's just everywhere.
She is everywhere, and she was battling against Emily Sisson. So Keira D'Amato is the marathon American record holder. Emily Sisson is the half marathon American record holder. So we knew it was going to be a great race. And Keira claimed the victory in a championship and course record.
Nice.
Yeah. And this is now 3 U.S. titles for D'Amato.
This year or ever?
Well, I think they've all been this year.
I think
right?
so.
I mean,
I just don't know for sure. I'm just asking.
Within like the year from now. Like
okay, well,
it's been and then, just a quick note, Emily and Keira traded leads to help each other for the first 8 miles, and both will be racing fall marathons, so keep your eyes out. Emily Sisson will be racing in Chicago and D'Amato in Berlin. Sisson said that being able to battle with Keira gave her great confidence since Keira is going for the American record in Berlin, so she felt good she could fight against one of our fastest marathoner in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah. Additional shout outs to Erica Kemp in 5th, Dakota Lindworm in 9th, Kim Conley in 11th, Andrea Pomeranski in 16th, and Joanna Stevens in 22nd. Those were all previous podcast guests.
All Andy's favorite people.
It's been fun to connect with them. The men's race, Connor Mance took the victory on the men's side, and he has the U.S. titles in the 20K championships and half marathon now. So he's a 2-time NCAA champ, and he is eager to run his marathon debut this fall. Following him was Leonard Career, and then previous podcast guest, Sam Chalenga, making yet another podium.
He's good at that.
So cool. Yeah.
Top 3 finishes are bread and butter for Sam Chalenga.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
And Clayton Young was 8th. He's a previous podcast guest.
Right on. All right. Well, the last note here we wanted to mention, largely because we've been talking about kind of previewing some of the fall marathoning stuff. And once again, there's been some interesting shakeups. On the one side, performance-wise, some people who have been looking fast and fit include Mo Farah winning the big half in London and Eilish McColgan. The Flying Scot.
The Flying Scot. Yes, she won in a course record time of 1:07:35. The previous course record was 1:09, so she crushed it. And Eilish was supposed to make her marathon debut this fall, but she's withdrawn. So sad for all of us who are eager to see that, because she has been on fire during the season with Commonwealth Games gold for Scotland, and she's had many medals for European Championships and British half marathon record on the road. So lots of good things for Eilish. We hope to see her doing the marathon sometime in the near future, but it won't be this fall.
Yeah. Bummer, but there will be a lot of other exciting ones as the fall marathoning is set to begin in London, right? Is London the first one? I think London's the first one. As it were, there's other things we hope to be seeing, including questions from you. So go to AtoZrunning.com/question to submit yours so that we can respond to you at our end of month Q&A episode each month.
Yes, we'd love to do that. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.